Okay, here we go. This video is going to take us into Plato's Republic, one of the most famous works of philosophy of all time. It begins with this sentence: I went down to the Piraeus. So the Piraeus is part of the polis of Athens, but not downtown. Piraeus is the port. And so it has its own kind of local culture. It's a place where lots of different languages could be heard. People from different cities would mix together. So there's a lot of symbolism in the idea of Plato's dialogue about what is the ideal city, what is the best way of organizing a city in a place that is not in the heart of Athens. In fact, it's a little bit on the outskirts of Athens, but in a place that's also connected to the rest of the world. So the setting of the dialogue is that Socrates and his friends are at a festival, a big festival held in Piraeus every year. And so they watch this festival, big daytime festival, lots of singing and dancing and partying. And then they go back to kind of continue the party at one of the friends' house, a guy named Polemarchus. And so there's this old man at the house, the father of the family, and his name is Cephalus. He's kind of pottering around and welcoming them, and so Socrates and his friends. So you're a successful old guy. Tell us, what's the very best thing about being so successful, being so rich? He says, and Cephalus says, I have a clean conscience. I don't owe anybody anything, and I never treated someone unjustly. And they say, well, what do you mean unjustly? What does that mean? What is justice? And how can it make you happy in the way that having no debts and having lots of food and a nice house can make you happy? How does being just make you happy? And so then now we're into the dialogue. Cephalus responds first. Well, justice is paying what you owe. It's giving what you owe. And then they kind of pursue that idea for a little bit, and it seems that it's actually not very complete. And then Polemarchus gives a second idea. Well, justice is about helping your friends and hurting your enemies. And then Socrates asks lots of questions about that idea, and it seems like, well, maybe that's not so satisfactory. And then one of the friends, a guy named Thrasymachus, a really cynical, kind of slightly bitter-edged guy, says, look, guys, let's just call it how it is. Justice is whatever the stronger person says is just. Justice is just whatever who happens to be in power says it is. And so they debate that. Socrates gets in a long conversation with Thrasymachus. He doesn't really back down. Socrates doesn't back down. So now we're at an impasse. We're at aporia. How are we going to break this impasse to figure out what justice is? So Socrates makes one of the most strange and famous suggestions. He says, well, I wonder if we could tell what justice is for a city, this big thing, a city, then maybe we could, by analogy, know what it is for an individual. A little weird as a philosophical move, but the others say, okay, fine, so let's talk about what would be the perfectly just city. And so they imagine this city. They call it Kallipolis, from kalos, meaning beautiful, good, and polis is, of course, the city. So Socrates says, okay, let's think about, in order for a city to be perfect, why do cities exist in the first place? Isn't it because for our basic needs, we can't satisfy them all by ourselves, whether it's food or housing or this kind of things? And then Glaucon, one of the other guys, says, but wait a second, if a city is only about satisfying basic needs, then our city would be no different than a city for pigs. Socrates says, yeah, actually you're right, that's true, but say the city is our perfect city is more than just about satisfying our material, our bodily needs, and it's about something more precious than that. Well, if the city is about something really precious, then doesn't that precious thing, whatever that precious thing is, need special protection? So therefore, special protection means people who are capable, guardians who are capable of protecting it. And they all agree, yes, certainly that's true. And so then Socrates tells a story. Okay, well, we can think of it this way. It's like each human being in this city is born with a certain kind of precious metal in their hearts. And some of them, right, have bronze in their hearts. And those are the ones who are really good for using their hands and making shoes and farming in the fields. And those are the bronze hearts. And that's what they should do. Those are the ones that are born that way. And so naturally, they're going to be good at making things with their hands, doing things with their hands. Then some of them have silver hearts, meaning that these are people who are brave, courageous, reliable, trustworthy, have these special qualities of moral strength. And these should be guardians, but maybe not the rulers. Let's call them auxiliary guardians, because the rulers, we might call the complete guardians of the city, they need not just to be strong and reliable and honest, they need to be smart. They need to have access to the best possible knowledge exists. And how are we going to find those people? Well, those are the ones who have gold, who are born with gold in their hearts. And the thing is, any kind of child, a gold one, a silver one, a bronze one, can be born to any other type. So 2 bronze parents can have a gold child, 2 gold parents can have a bronze child. And so if your own child is born bronze, that's totally okay. Send him to the fields. That's where he's going to do the best work for the city. Similarly, any children born with a mixture of silver and gold should be given recognition and promoted to the class of the guardians. And there's a prophecy, the gods say, that the city will end when bronze becomes its guardian. So the whole point of the city is to have this special class of people that's gonna make the laws and guard the laws for the city, and they can be born from any family, rich or poor. But they're the only ones who are going to have this special role. Everyone else is just going to make things with their hands, and only these guardians are going to. And because everyone had essentially an equal chance at being born with silver or gold, then this is going to be the most fair way of running the city. So, what does this mean? What kind of city would this create? Well, this is a city, claims Socrates, where the people who rule, who have political power, are the ones who deserve that power. They're the ones who were born with the capacity to use that power responsibly. And then so Socrates says, well, that's the story. This is how we would need to convince people to accept that some people are just born to rule and others are born to, fix shoes and train horses and steer ships. So do you think any possible way we can get people to believe that? And Glaucon says, well, no, not the first time we tell the story. But if we keep telling this story, then maybe their children might believe it and their children after them. And then that way the rest of the population would accept that this is how we're going to run our city. Socrates says, even that might help them to care more about the city and one another. I think I see what you're getting at. So this myth of the metals, bronze, silver, and gold, is a fiction. He admits that it's a story. They don't really have these metals in their body, but it's a fiction that helps people accept the rule of some over all the other ones. So we might ask the question, in politics, do we need useful fictions, otherwise known as lies, useful lies, stories that are not true but that help people accept the government? Well, here's where Plato arrives. He says, or in the mouth of Socrates, there is no end to suffering, Glaucon, for our cities, and none, I suspect, for the human race, unless either philosophers become kings in our cities, or the people who are now called kings and rulers become real, true philosophers. Unless there is this amalgamation, this combination of political power and philosophy, with all those people whose inclination is to pursue just power or just philosophy being forcibly prevented from doing so. So everyone who wants power has to be this in a special class of guardians, be worthy of that special class, and to study the truth, study knowledge and the truth. Otherwise, there's not the remotest chance of having this great city that we've talked about. So this is one of the strangest and most unusual claims in the history of philosophy to this point. No one, as far as we know, in all of Greek philosophy, the 200 years of philosophers before Plato, had ever suggested, as far as we know, that political power should be given to philosophers. and that was the only just way of running the city. So Plato makes here a totally new argument that we've been debating ever since, and in the idea of philosopher kings. In fact, one of the arguments for technocrats today, people who say, no, the common person shouldn't have power, is that special people with special degrees from special universities, we should give them the power to decide how to build our healthcare system, our education system, our money system, our armies, etc. And so the idea we have that certain technocrats should rule is really a direct descendant of Plato's very strange, innovative idea about philosophers and kings. So what does he say? Why should philosophers be the ones with political power? Well, first, he says they know the most. They have the most wisdom. They love truth. They sincerely love truth. They don't want to manipulate people or hurt them. And they find pleasure in what is true in the world, which is not what the world appears like, not what seems to be good, but is the single form of virtue. That virtue is all one thing. And what we see in the material world around us are just copies, sometimes very bad copies, of the eternal form of virtue, which is universal and eternal and the true for everyone. Here we see the influence of Pythagoras, who famously believed that the universe could be explained in mathematical terms, and that mathematics, because it's a universal language and is true from all peoples and for all times, is the pattern, the basic pattern of knowledge in the world. So Plato was very influenced by Socrates and also very influenced by Pythagoras, which is the opposite, really, of Protagoras when he says man is the measure of all things. Plato would say, no. Man is not the measure of all things. Man, if he is able to study philosophy, can attain a knowledge of the real truth, but that truth is the same for everyone. So this is why only philosophers can be trusted to make good laws. They're the only ones we can put in charge responsibly of the city. Also, they are able to acquire knowledge quickly, then remember it. And so the philosopher kings should be the ones to make the laws, the only ones who should make the laws. The auxiliary guardians, the silver ones, should be the ones to enforce it. They're the police force. And the bronze people have no say at all. They are the ones who are producing food and producing the skills and products, but they have no say at all. Only the ones with the capacity to learn philosophy should have political power. So another guy in the group of friends objects. Adeimantus says, wait a second. But look at the philosophers we know. Aren't most of them pretty strange or even kind of bad people like the sophists? And Socrates replies with another story. Okay, fine. I get it. Now let's imagine a ship whose sailors don't know how to sail. So people are on the ship, and most of them have no idea how to use the ship. And so they're fighting over who gets to be captain. And imagine one of them is really a good talker, right? He's a really good talker. He sounds great. He's got a big voice. He's charismatic. And he finds ways of persuading, or maybe even forcing, the ship owner to let him take control. Well, the others would probably, by mistake, call him the real sailor, a real captain, and say he's the one that has the knowledge about ships, even though the only thing he has is the ability to manipulate and persuade. These sailors, or would-be sailors, they don't even begin to understand that the true knowledge for commanding a ship, that the true fitness or merit of a captain is related to the knowledge of seasons of the year, the stars in the sky, the winds, and everything to do with his art. And don't you think that person who really has the knowledge will be called a crazy stargazer, a chatterer, or no use to them by those who sail in ships with this kind of crew? So this is how you should think about our present political leaders. They're like the sailors who don't really have knowledge, but they have the ability to make fancy speeches and persuade people that they do. And the people described by politicians as the useless stargazers, they're the ones who should really be trusted as captains of the ship, the ones with the knowledge of the stars and the winds. So this is Socrates' argument. How do you think? What do you think about this argument? Is this a good argument against elections, for example? So this is where in book 7, where he brings out maybe the most famous image from the book. He says, okay, the reason why philosophers aren't appreciated, aren't given political power today, is, and he says again, imagine another story where all the people in the city spend their whole lives, are born in a cave, and they spend their whole lives in this cave, and they've never been outside, they've never seen the sky. All they've seen are shadows on the wall, shadows of a horse, shadows of a ring, shadows of a bird, shadows of a vase. And they think that they're looking at real horses and real rings and real birds, but they're not. They're just looking at the shadows of people walking by behind this wall and the light of a fire behind them. But they think, because this is all they know, they think what they're looking at is the real thing. And then imagine that one of them finds a way out of the cave and is able to stand finally on solid ground, looking up at the sky, looking up at the sun. And this person comes back and says, guys, everybody, I've been out of the cave. I've seen the sun. I understand that what we're looking at here, they're not real. They're just appearances. They're just shadows. How would this person be treated? How would this person be treated? And this is how philosophers are treated, says Plato. They are the only ones who have really thought carefully and used this God-given gift of knowledge to understand the truth. And yet when they try to explain this to others, they're laughed at, they're ridiculed, because the others are still in the cave. What do you think about that metaphor? So then he moves to, what should the guardian's education be? Who should be in these guardians? And here's where Plato makes another very radical proposal that is totally different from any other work of philosophy that we know. Socrates, the character, says, natural attributes are evenly distributed between the two sexes. Isn't that true? And a woman is naturally equipped to play her part in all activities, just as a man is. Yes, yes, and the others agree. So these are Athenians, remember, these are Athenian men who were raised in the democracy, and Socrates, one of the most famous among them, says, well, isn't it true that women are naturally equipped to play her part in the city just as men? I mean, this is, pretty radical from the point of view of how Athens was organized, but these are Athenians, and they're questioning the system in Plato's story. We shall say, presumably, that one woman could be a natural doctor, while another is not, and one is naturally musical, and another unmusical, certainly. In which case, there are women who are suited to be guardians, and some women who are not. Women with these special abilities, the ability to learn philosophy, should also be selected to live with the men who have these abilities and be fellow guardians with them. So that Plato proposes in the character Socrates that women should be in this special class of rulers of the city and an equal footing to men. Remember, this is a city where only these special philosopher kings have any power at all. No, everyone else has zero power. All of the ability to make the laws and the rules and enforce them are in the hands of these guardians, but that women are in this special group as well. Very strange and unusual in the history of Western philosophy in the ancient world anyway. All these women, Socrates goes on, shall be wives in common for all the men. So no couples, no nuclear families. None of them shall live as individuals with any of the men. Children, in turn, shall belong to all of them. No parent shall know its own child, no child its own parents. Well, and then now the group is sort of like, wait a second, Socrates, you're pushing things a little far. Wouldn't people really disagree with that? Houses and dining halls will be communal, and no one will possess any private property of this kind, and the sexes will live in close proximity. So what's he saying? He's saying that in this group of guardians, their only loyalty must be to the city. If people start preferring their husband or their wife or their kids, then the city's over. So the people with political power, the ones who are making the laws, must have one loyalty only, and it's to the city, right? Not to their kids, not to pass on power to their kids, because they won't even know who their kids are. Maybe their kids are bronze and they won't be guardians, right? This is the only way that we can have a stable, well-governed city. This is Plato's argument. Our aim in founding the city is not to make one group outstandingly happy, but to make the whole city as happy as possible. Each individual should follow, out of the occupations available, the one for which his natural character best fits him. Not the one he wants to be. If you want to be a doctor, no. It's if you have the capacity to be a doctor, that's when we're going to allow you to be a doctor. And we've often heard others say, and often have said ourselves, that doing one's own job and not trying to do other people's jobs for them is justice. Can we think of any greater evil for a city than what tears it apart and turns it into many cities instead of one? Or any greater good than what unites it and makes it one? When anything at all, good or bad, happens to one of the citizens, a city of this kind will be most inclined to say that what is affected is a part of itself. The whole city will rejoice together or grieve together. The city is an organism, and it can only succeed when the whole city succeeds, right? And that is the only measure of success in politics. How does that sound? Would you like to live in that kind of city? And then his closing thought is a punch against democracy. Remember, this is the political system that Plato is deeply suspicious of. It had failed to protect Athens against the Spartans in his childhood. Athens had lost the war, and the restoration of democracy had put his favorite human being, Socrates, to death. So he had a lot of problems with democracy. He says, of course, democracies seem charming. They're fun, right? Because you have people from all over, and they're all living in different ways, and it's dynamic, and they're different forms of art and architecture and theater. But all desires are treated equally. There's no standard that which sets what is good or excellent for the whole city. Young people act like old people act like young people. No one is really compelled to follow a single law. Everyone kind of does randomly what they want. And those desires change all the time. Some people, love to get drunk all the time, and then they say, no alcohol, we're going to drink nothing but water. So you get this chaos and instability. And the people who are ruling are the ones, like in the sailors in the ship, who just happen to be good talkers, not the ones with actual knowledge of the truth and how to run things in the city. And so he says, the insatiable longing for what it deems good, which is the freedom of the individual to live how he wants, that is what destroys the city. What do you guys think? Did Plato give us a good criticism of how democracy works? Keeping in mind that how we live is not really democracy. But this is what Plato saw around him in Athens. Furthermore, he says, democracies aren't going to last, because sooner or later, one very rich and charismatic person, bankrolled with money from his friends, will become, quote unquote, the people's champion. He'll claim to be the one who is going to stand up and help all of the average people. And then once he gets power, he starts eliminating rivals. He starts asking for personal bodyguards. Those bodyguards give him more power to force people to do what he wants. Then he starts declaring wars as a pretext for putting his critics in jail. And finally, Plato says, in our city, unlike in democracy, we're going to get rid of the tragic poets like Aeschylus and Sophocles, who are always seducing us into tyranny and democracy. So what do you think? Does Plato have a point here, that this is the way democracies always go, and how they lead into tyranny? So, discussion questions for us to consider. First of all, what do you think about Plato's Republic, about Callipolis? Would you want to live there? Secondly, how strong are his different arguments against collective intelligence and democracy as it was practiced in Athens? And finally, what would it take if we imagined a city where all citizens had the chance to become philosopher kings? What kind of education system would we have? What would we need to do to make that kind of city possible? Okay, that is all for this video, and we'll turn next to Aristotle.